All right, welcome back, everyone. Beneath the Helmet, Season 3, another awesome episode. We're going to talk everything leadership today in fire service. Today, I get to sit down with an author, a former principal, former teacher, coach, firefighter, and fire chief. Today, I get to sit down with Marc Hill. I'm your host, Arjuna George, former fire chief, turned podcaster, author, and coach for the fire service. Today, we're going to jump into everything about leadership.
It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired fire chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
So welcome to the show, Marc Hill.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. Nothing more than I love to talk about with leadership and how, especially I love to talk about how I screwed up. You know, don't do what I did. That is one of the biggest things that I love talking about.
That's the best lessons, right? Best lessons for yourself and other people, right?
Hard and frustrating lessons that it's like, man, I can't believe I did that. I knew better and I did it anyway. You know, it's just like,
yeah.
Don't do
when you're in the moment. It's hard to see that through the fog of what you're going through, right? So
that's right. That's right.
Tell our listener a little bit about Marc Hill, who you are, and kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Oh, let's see. Let's start the way back, right? I grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So I'm a Youper. I'm not from Michigan. Michigan is people that live below the Mackinac Bridge. I'm a Youper. I'm from the UP. The best part of Michigan. Grew up there. My dad was a volunteer firefighter. So I grew up, going to the fire hall, which we called it the fire hall. Some places don't call it the fire hall, but we call it the fire hall, and so I grew up, having my dad tie me up and rescue knots and, things like that, and rolling hose and throwing candy out of the fire trucks and, and the parades back when you were allowed to ride around in fire trucks and throw a candy, so that was the way I grew up. And, my dad was really big into it and he spent a lot of time and, he was also my Boy Scout coach or my troop leader. So, he'd throw me a piece of rope, after dinner and with gloves, and he'd like, all right, tie me a bowline with gloves on under the table, because Mark, when you're in a fire, Mark, you can't see anything, which he's not wrong, so I grew up like that, which is bizarre, right? That's a weird way to grow up sometimes for those of us, that weren't. So it was kind of put in my system pretty early, right? Went to college, got my degree to be a teacher, actually. Taught for over 8 years. While I was teaching, I was also a volunteer firefighter too. So did the whole thing on the volunteer side in a real rural area. Going to brush fires, doing water shuttles with our tankers and tenders, and, there was no hydrants. We were out in the middle of nowhere in northern Wisconsin. So yeah, you had to know who your tender support was and how many gallons they were coming, and whether we're going to surround and drown this barn or what we're doing. But so it was a real rural out there, and then got my master's degree in leadership, in educational leadership, which goes back to I knew better a lot of the things I screwed up, but also was a football coach, principal in my building, coached track as well, and got into the full-time fire service after actually got laid off when my oldest daughter was born, which was kind of like one of those things, like, all right, we're going to make budget cuts. And I lost my job. I got bumped out of my job at the middle school by the high school teacher back when there was seniority for in education down here. So, I couldn't find a job. Like I couldn't even pay to get an interview because I was now 8 years plus master's degree, and no one wanted to, which I get, on a money standpoint, I get it, why hire me when they can hire someone fresh out of school.
Right.
Even though you're getting experience and you're getting all this, knowledge and information and, all that stuff. But, okay, fine. So I'm like, all right, this is my opportunity to do something else. And I'm like, I want to go into full-time firefighting. And here in Wisconsin, in order to do that outside the city of Milwaukee, you have to be a paramedic. So went back, got my paramedic, was then at that same transitional time, I had the great opportunity to become fire chief, the first full-time chief in my local neighboring village of Rothschild. Was the first full-time chief they had there. Redid the whole system, went through the whole gambit, which is where most of my second book comes from. All of the mistakes and the lack of political, repertoire I did not do, and I knew better, but I was ripping Band-Aids off and, come hell or high water. So, which we can talk about that, obviously. And yeah, so from that chief experience and, wearing the white hat and doing all that stuff from an administrative budgeting and, literally getting everything coordinated. Cause we also ran an ambulance service out of our station too. So, did all those things, which was an immense amount of work. Which is why they had a full-time chief. But anyway, from there, I'm like, okay, this is not, this ain't working, So luckily, because, how things are, because I was the chief there, I got to know the local chiefs, and I still had my medic, and the chief from the neighboring larger department said, hey, we've got a bunch of openings. I need people that have experience, because we're real young. So if you're open to it, going back down on the line and, doing that whole thing, I said, hey, absolutely. I could care. I'm not looking for, accolades. I don't need to wear the white helmet. I don't need any of that stuff. The gold badge, that's fine. They're sitting in a drawer. I got 3 of them sitting there. That doesn't bother me. I can care less. I'd rather go and be on the line and run on the bus and do actual work, as opposed to managing people and dealing with budgets and going to meetings and trying to, fight for your, the department's life. I'd rather just go and work on the line. Absolutely. So that's what I did. I applied, transferred over, did that for many, many years. And because of my teaching background, I was kind of pigeonholed, which is not I didn't have a problem with it, but it was hey, Mark was a teacher. We'll have Mark teach all the new guys. Okay, fine. So I ended up being in charge of the probationary academies, and, I was given a lot of the new guy, obviously on my crew. So, B crew, which was the best crew. I was teaching all the new guys, every new guy, every group that came through. I was the person. Well, then unfortunately I hurt my back. I blew a disc out, on the job, lifting someone I shouldn't have been lifting by myself. I always call for lifting assistant.
Great story.
Yeah, right. You learn the hard way again, right? So when I was out with my back injury, that void of Mark taught everybody was noticeable. So I was constantly fielding emails and phone calls and, hey, when you were doing this, what were you doing? And hey, when you did this, what was the, or where's that sheet for that? Or, just stuff like that. So I'm like, well, I'm laid up in bed for, a couple months. So I had the time. So that's when I wrote my first book, Too Dark 30. That was the inkling as to why I wrote that first book, which was, just basically how to be an effective teacher in the fire service, and emergency service. It's not just for us, but it's an overall, course as to how to be a teacher. That basic fire instructor course is great, but just like the courses I took in college, they don't ever tell you how to be a teacher. They talk about curriculum and they talk about planning and they talk about this, they talk about all this stuff, but no one ever tells you how to actually teach, how to actually, give information, how to communicate, how to take questions, how to come up with different questions that, okay, if everyone in the group is all staring at you like, like like you're speaking in French, or you got bugs crawling out of your head, that should be a clue that you're losing the room and that you need to circle, come back to what we're talking about. Okay, let me try something else, right? Those things that you learn, unfortunately, you learn the hard way by doing them. They never teach you how to do that stuff. So that's where that book kind of came from. And it's full of the stories of when I was teaching and, how I learned how to do this and, take it from this aspect, right? Which is just, again, it's like anything, what worked for me doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, because our personalities are going to be different. I never had a problem when I was teaching middle and high school. I never had a problem, getting everyone's attention. I'm 6'3", 270 pounds. I walk into a room and I can bark and get your attention real quick. You know what I mean? So, and I'm loud. Naturally, I'm naturally loud. So I'm hard to miss. So, that classroom management aspect that a lot of people struggle with, especially like new officers, when they're like, okay, you're in charge of training for the day with your crew. What are you going to do? And they're real mousy and they're real quiet, and then no one's, everyone's looking down at the ground and, okay, guy, well, we're going to do like this. And it's just like, okay, yeah, that's one way to do it. But if you want to be effective, you have got to break out of that small mousy role and don't worry about screwing up. First thing I tell my students is I don't know everything. 100%. I don't know everything. I'm not going to pretend I know everything, but together we can find out the information, or together we can find the answer. Or, you know what, if I don't know it, maybe I know someone else who does, and I'll ask them and I'll get back to you. Or why don't you research that for me and get back to me and tell everyone what you learned? There's other ways to do things like that. And,
For sure.
people are so scared that they have to know everything and that you can't be wrong and, all those different things. And it's just not the case when you're teaching, especially when you've been teaching for so long. You learn that, you understand that.
Mhm.
And a lot of those fresh officers, they're so scared, because they think that's going to make them look bad, or, I don't want them to think that I don't know everything. It's like, listen, no one does. I hate the word expert. I cannot stand that word expert, because, that word to me implies that all that learning is now done, right?
Right.
Yeah, I wrote 2 books, so what? I could have written 50 books. I could have written the textbook on whatever we're talking about. It still doesn't mean that you do not know everything. And
Mm.
constantly we're always changing and learning new things and finding new ways to do things, or, nowadays, using AI or using virtual reality training methods, or, all this different stuff, insert gripes from the fire department. I hate computer training. I don't want to sit in front of a computer. I don't want to, I got to constantly do everything in Lexipol, or, all this different stuff. It's just like, well, yes. But if you're not, it's like PowerPoint, right? PowerPoint, I always laugh when I go to presentations, right? I'll present, or I'll sit in on other people presenting before I present, or whatever, because I like to find out. I like to see how people are doing stuff. And it's kind of cringy when I go to different, lectures or whatever, and they've got a PowerPoint up there and it's got so much information on it that you can't even read it. And it's just like, what does that even say? I can't even, and they're just literally reading the slide. It's just like, oh, I wish I could talk to you for 5 seconds, like,
Yeah.
don't, that's not what PowerPoint was for. It was never for that, like, at all. It's supposed to be bullet points. It is supposed to be just things that kind of keep the ball rolling. That's all it is. Don't sit there and read. I can read just fine.
Yeah.
Someone reading to me, so that's, the things like that, that was where I wanted to write that first book. That, listen, you got to start with stories.
Mm.
People, we all learn the best from telling stories. Let me tell you about this time. Let me tell you about what and people, they will automatically, engage with you when you're telling a story, right? And the other thing too is, it doesn't have to be your story.
Right.
You could tell a story from somebody else. Like, hey, Dan told me this time when, this is what happened, blah, 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 no kidding. Yeah, that's what happened. Holy,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
it doesn't have to be your story. I was teaching social studies. Yeah, I taught U.S. history. I taught world history. Guess what? I didn't live through the Roman Empire. I did not, but I told the stories from Plato and from, Euclides and, all this. I read their books, I read their stories, and we talked about their stories let's talk about, the Marcus Aurelius, who is great at writing things down and doing his meditations and talking about, he was a great one talking about different things and his thoughts and that. It doesn't have to be your stories, it does not at all have to be your stories. You can tell other people's stories, give them credit.
Yep.
Don't tell it like it was your story, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be your story.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that reminder. Yeah, that's good.
And, a lot of people, but they freak out about stuff like that. They're like, oh, it didn't happen to me. That's fine. That's okay. Like I said, all the experiences I've had, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Hill of beans, the different presentations, I've been at different, conferences where, you'll have different people speaking from like big departments, huge departments like, New York Fire Department, Los Angeles, Toronto, whatever, insert large city here. And people automatically like, oh man, they did the job. They really worked. And, I'll talk to them and, I'll be like, well, whatever. They'll talk about like, engine tactics or like pulling lines, stuff like that. And I'll be like, well, you know way more about that than I do. And they're like, listen, this is literally all I did for 25 years. I have no other experience in doing anything else. I never rode the box. I never went on a rescue. I never, I was never on a truck company. I didn't throw ladders. I humped hose and I brought hose down the hallways. That's what I did for 25 years. I have a lot of experience with that. He's like, I've never done budgeting. I've never been into a meeting with council members where I have to tell them how and why why we need a new fire truck. I've never hired anyone in an interview. I've never trained anyone, so we all assume so much from these people that are coming from these larger departments, but they're very specialized in what they're talking about, which is not bad. That's great when they're talking about that one individual subject. So when those of us that come from smaller departments where we have to be the jacks of all trades and you're wearing 20 different hats, we have a plethora of, knowledge because we have to, the old phrase, we're, jacks of all trades, we're masters of none, because that is absolutely the case. I got to be a fire inspector, and I also have to be a paramedic. And then I also have to be a hazmat technician. And then I've also got to be a rope rescue technician. And then I've also got to go and be on the truck company sometimes. And then sometimes I've got to go over here and do the engine company stuff. And then if we go to the rural area, I've got to be able to drop the dump and be able to go and have a float. And,
it's incredible, isn't it?
We've got kinds of jobs, right? And then extraction. And then we have, so it's like, we have got all this stuff. So it's impossible to know everything. And really to keep yourself really up to date with everything, because you run so many calls on those types of departments where you have to do everything, right? So our department, the one I medically retired from, Wausau Fire Department, we had 3 stations. We really should have had 5, right? Our call volume was, well over into the 8,000-9,000 calls just between the 3 stations that we had. We were constantly working with minimum staffing, right? So when I was there, it's improved now because of grants and they've hired more people at least. But when I was working back in my day, there was 2 of us on the box, two guys on the ambulance, and then 2 people on the engine. That was it. That was your full response.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, those ambulances were busy doing something. We were on medical calls. So if we had a structure fire, you had an engine with 2 guys coming, you had another engine with 2 guys coming, and then you had a truck company with 2 guys coming. You had 6 guys coming with 3 trucks. That's it. And if a med could clear, they would come as well, you know. But that was it. That isn't even according to NFPA standard. That's not enough people for one, room and context fire. That's not enough people technically. When you're doing 2 in, 2 out and doing all, the whole, you got a RIT team and all that was it. That was what we were working with, right? When I was volunteer firefighting, when I was working on rural fire control, there were 2 fires. I showed up in the country. We were a township of 36 square miles. So it was a 6x6, but we were 3 different townships that came together to form our rural control area. So we had 72 miles in one area, 36 miles in our area, and another 36 miles. One station that was centrally located between all 3 townships. And there were 2 fires that I responded to that was in my local township that I was closest to, because I responded right to the fire with my vehicle because I had all my turnout gear in my trunk, that me and the homeowner did a bucket line trying to put their outside, trying to put the fire out, because I knew even if there were people at my station, the response time was going to be 15 minutes.
No.
Just from where we were to, if there were people at the station rolling to us at, emergent, it was going to take 15 minutes, let alone respond, blah, blah. So I knew I had almost 25 plus minutes. I'm not going to sit here with this guy watching his house burn. Everyone's out. So I'm like, you got buckets, or you got this, or you got, let's try to calm. Can we control this the best that we can? You do what you got to do, right? Mm-hmm. That's just what happens.
Got to be resourceful.
Yeah, and that's the thing, did I go by the book and, no, obviously I did not, I wasn't making entry, and everyone was out there was, so we, I didn't have to worry about that. But if push came to shove and there was someone in there, I'm not going to sit here and, not do anything. I'm going to try my best to go in there, or try to find a way to get in there, or maybe try to find a way to get those people, ladders, something to get that, you know what I mean? Like, you do something, especially in those kind of situations when you're in the rural area, your help is a long way away. Right. So, those are the types of things that as leaders, if you're in a leadership position and you get brought, someone to your desk saying, all right, this is what Mark did, you have to make the decision. Do I reprimand this person, or is there another way to go about doing it? Right.
There's always a better way. Usually there's a better way, and that's right.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, do I want to sit and berate this person and write them up and put a letter in their file and give them a verbal warning and, go through the discipline procedures and blah, 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 because the contract says, or do I want to take it from the point of view of context, right? Tell me exactly what happened. Tell me exactly what was going on. Tell me because context, that story, it matters, right? It's never what you get told initially, when you're in that leadership role. There's always more to it.
For sure.
Someone may be telling you, hey, did you hear blah, 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 or it could be a citizen, right? Citizen complaint, right? You get the phone calls, I remember there was one phone call I got from an old guy complaining that my engine crew did not put the shopping cart away appropriately at the grocery store when they were shopping for groceries. He called it, complained they're destructing property, blah, 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 all these different things. It's ridiculous. They shouldn't even be out. They shouldn't be doing these, he just went on a whole rant about what was going on and how he didn't like it and everything about it. I was just agreeing with him, like, yep, okay, yep, all right, sounds great, yeah, absolutely, yes, sir, I will talk to them, yep, absolutely, okay, thank you very much, And then I call the crew and I'm like, well, okay, what the hell? This guy, why is he so hot? You tell me what happened, because I got inside of the story, and that's his blinded view of whatever happened, right? And they said, well, this is what was going on. And while we put our cart away, we grabbed two other ones that were in the parking lot. And the young guy's like, yeah, I rolled it forward, right? The old school, kids, woo, roll it forward. And he's like, that was it.
Crazy.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Two sides to the story.
Yeah. And I didn't write anybody up. I didn't give them, reprimands that, whatever. But all I told them was, listen, someone's always watching.
Yeah. 100%.
So just be careful, and that was it. That's enough. I said, I'm not saying anything more.
Yeah.
That's it. It doesn't have to go any further.
For sure.
But I've worked for people that they would go farther. I have. I've worked for bad leaders that, all right, this is your verbal warning. This is your first violation. Blah, 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 blah. It's just like, really? You're writing me up for this? Seriously?
The ironic thing, that's the easy way out, is writing up. That's an easy way to mentor, to coach, to train your firefighters. That's the hard way. And that's why people go this way.
They don't want to have difficult conversations.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the other thing too. Like, no one wants to be an asshole. I don't want to be an asshole. Of course not. Everyone wants to be loved, and, everyone wants to be patted on the, be that guy. Hey, he lets us do anything we want. You're not doing your job if that's what's going on, right? That old Steve Jobs quote, if you want to make everyone happy, sell ice cream.
Right. Yeah.
Of course. Be Santa Claus. Yeah, of course.
Right. Totally. So Chief, looking back at your, when you became the first career chief.
Yep.
What was your mindset going into that role? And then the follow-up question is going to be, what did you learn leaving that post?
So, context, backstory.
Need context.
Yeah, gotta have context. Gotta set you up. There's the whole thing here. All right. So, in my second book, so the second book I wrote, Read Before Leading, right? I start the whole book basically at my coming to Jesus meeting with the Police and Fire Commission at the end of my tenure. They brought me in basically to fire my ass, 100%. They brought me into the hot seat. They're sitting there, all the members of the commission, they're all sitting there, and they're okay. Like, I had letters from my officer staff that wrote letters to them saying that I was a toxic leader, that I was being, favoritism was being played, and I was not doing things appropriately. I mean, you name it. They wrote letters saying that I was doing all this different stuff. Whether it was true or not, didn't matter, and it was only a few of them, the very squeaky wheels, So the context of the whole thing is this. The chief before me, beloved, okay, to the point where he was literally a family member to some of the people on the department, right? Literally and figuratively. Been on the department, was part of that department for 30 plus years. Okay. So automatically you're going in having to fill shoes like that. It's not going to work. But here's the thing that I didn't realize at the time. I don't need to fill his shoes, right? I'm not him. Like, literally, I'm not him. And you cannot replace a person like that. That's not going to work. So don't go in thinking that that's going to happen. Okay. And that's not a bad thing. That's that's how reality is. Right. I mean, all the divorce families that are out there, how many times have kids like, you're not my dad, you're not my mom, all those different things. Well, because they're not, you can do the best job you can, I'm not saying be bad, but at the same time, you're not that person. Okay. So going in, I was replacing that guy. He died. Okay. He actually had a line of duty death, had a heart attack post EMS scene. So that was the second context. When I was getting interviewed for that position, they still had black bunting from the funeral laying on the floor of the station. So they're in mourning. It wasn't like he retired and we're looking for a new chief. He literally was there, had been there for so long, was part of that community, part of their, everything, and then he died. So now I'm not only am I stepping into the role of the guy that had been there for that long, now I'm stepping into the role of the guy that died
Right.
on, which again, super hard,
Mhm.
super, super hard. So they were still, and I wanted to make my mark, literally Mark wanted to make his mark, and I wanted to fix things, and I didn't have patience. And while I was getting the tours, I was keeping a mental note of all the things I was seeing that needed to be changed in my head, right? This isn't the way it should be, or this isn't the way it should be, or this should be packed like this, or these tools are not organized right. They need to be over here, or just stuff like that, right? Because I'm a weirdo like that kind of thing. And some of it's from the teaching background, like, no, it's got to go like this, or, just trust me. It may be a shortcut, but you need to understand the whole thing and you need to do it like this, right? So I was making mental checklists in my head as I was walking through the station, as I was looking at things. And, you know, I even asked myself when they offered me the job, I'm like, do I really want this? Is this something, but I love a challenge. I love being the underdog. I love taking that team that was horrible and let's bring them to the Super Bowl, or, bring them to the Grey Cup, or whatever, Stanley Cup, insert whatever, championship you want. I want to do that. That's the other coach aspect to me, that I want to, let's raise the bar. Let's get going. Let's get this thing moving. Right. So I challenge accepted. Absolutely. And I went in without patience. I went in like I said, I was ripping band-aids off, and I was making changes that needed to be made, and they weren't wrong for being made, but the way I did it was wrong, right? I went in, like a bull in a china shop. Okay, all this stuff, take this stuff off off their ladder truck. Which technically was not a ladder truck. It was an engine with a snorkel that had an emergency ladder on the top that they called their ladder truck. And I'm like, technically, that's not a ladder truck. That is not a truck company. That is emergency use only. That is actually not rated for more than 150 pounds. But they didn't like the changes I was making, because that's not what we had been doing for 30 years.
Right.
And I didn't get buy-in. I just went in and started making changes. The changes, like I said, the changes I wanted to make were not wrong, but the way I went about doing that was wrong. I should have had more patience. I should have not even done, honestly, I shouldn't have done anything for like the first 4 or 5 months. Like literally. Like I said, these people were still in mourning. They had just buried their chief like 3 months prior. You know what I mean? Like I should have been way more, trying to connect with the people emotionally, trying to, let them understand who I was, let them learn who I was, let them try to understand where I was coming from, and then at the same time, I was getting pressure from on high, right? From our local municipal governments that, Mark, you need to go in there and change stuff. That's literally what I was told. Go in there and change things. Make it right. Well, now I'm getting it, I'm getting told from one to do it. I want to do it as well. And then I'm having resistance, you know? So then I found the people that wanted to do the changes, because they were like, thank God you want to make the changes. So there's those people. Well, then they became like my yes men, right? They were the ones I could count on to do what I wanted to get done. And then it's like, as a leader, who do I go to all the time then? Because they're willing to do what I want to do, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I have a list of 1,000 things I need to do. So you know what? You two want to do it? Great. Here you go. Run with it. I don't care what your position is. I don't care that you're not an officer currently. I don't, you're willing to do the change I want to make. Fantastic.
Did that help the department or did that divide the department?
It totally divided everything because it became a us versus them mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
It became where those that wanted to progress and who wanted to fix the things that truly needed to be fixed versus the old school that didn't see a problem with the way they'd been doing it for 30 years. And I actually told my assistant chief, who was 72 years old, he was on the department for, almost 40 plus years. I actually told him one day when I was so tired of all the stuff, I said, you know what? Just because you did it that way for 35 years, doesn't mean you did it correctly for 35 years. It's just like, after I said that, I was like, I can't believe I said that. What, because I was pissed and I was at the end of my rope. I'm tired of having to explain myself. Then, and I'm like, just because you've been doing it this way doesn't mean you've been doing it correctly that way. I'm not wrong because what they were doing was not legal. And, there has been major advancements in technology, so it's just like the way the communication I did, completely wrong, 100%. Instead of going in there like a bull in a china shop, I should have went in there and, like I said, I shouldn't have done anything. From that chief level, right? That high executive leadership level, the biggest things aren't the stuff that you see. You got to find out politically what's going on, right? Who's in favor of what's going on? Who are your stakeholders, right? The classic stuff. Who's the stakeholders? Who are the policymakers? Who's got influence? Like, who are the people that truly have influence on this department? And it doesn't mean they have to be officers. They could be anybody. They could be anybody on that department that could actually be really influential. Those are the people you got to find out who they are first. Then you bring them into individual meetings with you, find out where are we on the same page or are we not, or like, where can we find common ground? Or, that's the stuff, the political stuff. That's what takes time, right? That takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of conversations, and it takes a lot of the things that type A personalities are very bad at waiting and taking those steps. And I had to learn that the hard way, right? But the thing that really makes it worse for me was I knew better, right? Because I come from public education. When I was a principal, I was doing those things already. It doesn't mean that it's any different on a fire department. It's not. It's 100% not.
So what changed for you? Why did you go in with that mindset then? If you knew it was wrong and your past career and life was,
I know. I honestly don't know. I don't know. I think part of it was I wanted to prove everyone that I could do the job. So it was ego, right? I wanted to make all the changes, and I wanted to do it quickly so that everyone would be like, wow, Mark really changed that department in like 3 months.
mm-hmm.
And it was a 5-year job, 100%.
Right. Yeah.
At a minimum 5 years job. And I wanted to do it in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Ain't gonna happen, man. Not even close. Not even close.
So, for the listener right now, how important is patience in a new leadership role? Could be an officer, could be a senior firefighter, or it could be a chief officer.
Patience is everything. It really is. Patience, and roll right into that is politics. When you're in that and it doesn't matter if you're a chief or if you're the deputy chief, the assistant chief, the lieutenant, the captain, sergeant, insert whatever title you want to insert. It doesn't matter what title you have, what leadership position you have. It's going to take patience, but it's also going to take the politics. It comes with it. It doesn't, I know it sucks. Politics does suck. It does, but at the same time, it's part of the job, and there's nothing you can do to change how that is. It's just the way it is. So the best thing you can do is learn patience learn that it's going to take time, and then learn the best way to politically maneuver what you want to get done in the best way possible. And, you know, when you get to the chief level, it's a lot about having people think that they're the ones that came up with the idea, right? It's not, it doesn't have to be your idea. But at the same time, if you've done your job and you've had your, you've taken the time, you've done the patience, you've done your diligence, and you've kind of planted your seeds where you wanted to plant them, and you've watered those seeds, and you've done the job of kind of toning and making sure that those things are going to grow and they're going to disseminate, that you're hoping you're hoping that, oh, if everything goes according to plan, this should work out, right? That's just part of the process, right? If I want to buy $1 million new truck, I can't just arbitrarily go to the village or to the city or to whoever it is. I'm not going to just go there one night during one meeting and say, hey, we need a new $1 million truck and we need it tomorrow. The answer is going to be no, right? There's a process you have to do, and you have to learn that process, that it's going to take months of effort to get that governing body to say yes to that, right? You have to go through everything, because they don't know what's going on in your department. They don't know that the trucks are in the shape that they're in, or that they've had mechanical issues, or you've got new equipment that won't fit in those things now, or whatever, right? They don't know any of those things. They literally have no idea. So you have to spend that time, that patience, and then the politics. You got to spend the time over the course of months going through and walking them, strategically as the chief, going to the meeting and say, well, engine 2 is out of service again because, we're constantly having this issue with this engine or whatever. You got to plant that so that by the time 4 months later that you come to them and say, listen, we really need to talk about replacing engine 2, because now that for the past 5-6 months, because I've brought these issues to you for now 6 months, that you are now aware that we're constantly out of service of this thing. Here's the repair slip again. Here's another repair slip. Here's another. They can't find this part. They can't, whatever, right? You've established that chain of events that now, after you set up all those dominoes, you can now knock those dominoes over, and they're going to go right in the line that you want. That's just it. But that takes time, and that takes patience, and that takes political planning to maneuver that river and to get to that point where you need to be. Okay. And that's at the chief level, right? If I'm a lieutenant or a captain and I'm new and I've got a bunch of new guys that have no idea what the hell, they don't know whether they're on foot or horseback, then I need to spend the time and go back to square one, which is being the teacher, right? Where are we deficient? If we're an engine company, where are we deficient with whatever are we deficient in hose loads? Are we deficient in deploying, whatever we need to do? If we're a ladder company, are we deficient in throwing ladders? Do we know our ropes and knots like we should? Do we, all those different things, right? Packaging people. Do we need to where are we deficient? Spend the time on the deficiencies, right? And it doesn't even mean that you, as the captain, you don't have to do all the teaching, right? As a group, let's sit down and let's talk about what we're good at. Let's talk about what we're not good at. Let's be honest. And if everyone sits there and doesn't say anything, then as the leader, you have to start. I'll start us off. I need more work with, writ work, or I need more work with packaging, patience with the longboard, or whatever, right? Start with something that you personally are maybe deficient in. Or here's the other thing, and this is the thing you learn, right? If you know that 3 of the people that are deficient in something and everyone is quiet, use that as the example. Listen, I need more work in whatever they're deficient in, which maybe I know it 100%, right? But that's not the point.
Well, you're creating safety at the same time too, right?
Yeah.
Safety for them to say, oh, me too, chief.
Exactly. Like, hey, if I need, we all need work, and I know these 3 people need, maybe we're on the med. I know we all need more work with our cardiac medications, right? I know it, but I've been on the med for 15 years and I know it 100%. I got the protocol memorized. I don't need work in it. But you know what? As the leader, I'm going to say, you know what? There's some things with the cardiac meds that I like to review. I know those people, I know they need the work. So I'm going to use that as an example, even though I know I don't need the work, but I'm going to use it as something I'm going to say to make them more comfortable. And then we're going to go through and we're going to work through those things together. Right. And then they're like, okay, good. Okay. All right. And then once you start that ball rolling, you'll be amazed at where that will go. And it'll be much easier as you go on, It really will. But if you come in like, I know everything and I'm an arrogant and I'm a saltiest of the salty and look at how awesome waxed my mustache is and I've been through everything, no one's going to say anything.
Totally.
They're not going to say a thing.
I assume, and I'm going to assume, but let me know if I'm wrong, that you're a person with high expectations of maybe yourself and your organization. When I coach individuals, they struggle with coming in with that same mindset, high expectation, but maybe their team around them is not on the same playing field. How do you maneuver through having high expectations of your organization, your people, and the people around you, maybe not so much? How do you bring them up a little bit, or where they are?
Yeah, and a lot of it goes back to my coaching days, right? So I played and coached football many, many, many years, American football. And when I was coaching, one of the things you always get those, I'm trying to think of it, Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's got a book. He was a football coach in Ohio State. It's called Above the Line.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that book. Yep. I don't think I've read it personally, but yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. It's kind of not, it's more, there it is. There it is. Above the Line, which is, so anyway, which again, no one's perfect. So here's the thing. So for those that don't know who Urban Meyer was, he was a football coach, American football coach down, college football for many, many years, was very successful down in Florida. He went on and he got out of it because he was having heart problems. It was stress, right? Stress. And that's what happens when you get the big chief job. There's a lot of stress. So he took a few years off, then came back to coaching again and was at Ohio State. Very successful again. So his book, Above the Line, he had this chart that he went over with all of his players. And it's a lot of this stuff is psychologically, it's the psychological studies too. So whenever you have a group of people, right, it's the old 80-20 rule, right? You ever hear that one, right? 80% of your work is done by 20% of the staff. 100%. Every organization, doesn't matter where you're at, okay? That 20% that's doing everything, right? Those are what he determined as, those are the people above the line, right? Those people are your go-getters. You don't have to worry about those people. They are going to do it no matter what. And they're going to do it to a high level, right? They're self-starters, self-motivated. They're already up here, right? The problem is bringing up that other 80, right? How do I get that other 80% into that 20% realm? The problem is, and from a psychological standpoint, the problem is you're never going to do it. It's not going to happen. You can only probably get 60% of that 80 up a notch. There's always going to be a bottom 20 that are just going to do the bare minimum. Doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much motivation. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you pay them. It doesn't matter. Those people are always going to be on that bottom tier. Okay. So they're going to be there and they're going to be stuck. Okay. The problem when you're in that high level management job, right, is you want to make sure that your process is weeding out those bottom 20, right? I don't have a problem hiring someone that is completely clueless, that doesn't have the knowledge, but you know what? They have the attitude that I want,
Sure.
right? I can't teach attitude. I can't. I can influence and I can help motivate a little bit, but I can't. Your attitude is it's a personal thing, right? Knowledge, I can teach knowledge, right? As a teacher, I can give you knowledge, I can help you get the skills, I can do all those different things. Okay. So that's a kind of a side note to the importance of hiring, right?
Hire for
Super,
character.
super important to hire, to have a really good hiring process, to weed out those bottom 20. Okay. They may look great on paper. They may talk fantastic, but at the same time, they're stuck and they're not going anywhere, and they have no interest in going anywhere. So you'll never get those people up. So you want to spend all your time on that 60%, right? So for him, it was in college football, right? So those are the players that he was spending his time working with. Those A players, those top tier athletes, they're going to be up there. Okay. I'm going to use those A players to help my B players get up in those levels. I'm going to use those A players. I'm going to put them in leadership positions. I'm going to put those people in maybe non-leadership positions, right? Like I said, you don't have to have a title to be a leader. You know, I need someone running a committee, right? Great. I don't need an officer running the committee. I can have anyone run a committee, right? Give them that role. Empower those people at the top, empower them, give them the positions, give them the structure, give them the opportunity to do more because they're looking for it. They're striving for it. They want it. Okay. Those A-type players that end up leaving your department to go someplace else because they think the grass is greener, or maybe they're leaving your department because the opportunities are greater in someplace else. That's why they're leaving. They're not leaving for titles. They're leaving because of the opportunities that they're not getting. Right. So we need to make sure that we're developing opportunities for those people. And like I said, being in charge of the new ladder truck committee. I don't need an officer for that. Anyone can. Here's a great person to put in charge of that committee. Let them roll with it. I need I need cadre. I need instructors for this new probation school. I don't need every officer, no. I'm going to get those A-type people. They're going to come down here and they're going to bring those B people up, and they're going to do the teaching, right? That's how you raise the bar up, because when those 60%, right? Those B to B team people, when they are getting educated by the A teamers, 100% those people want to emulate the way that they're doing things, right? I want to be just like them. Those 80%, the problem is they just don't know how to do it. That's where the teaching comes in. You need to be able to coach them, and you need to be able to teach them, and you need to be able to facilitate ways for those people to get up into that echelon that you're looking for, right? That's all in his book. That's what he talks about. It's either above the line or it's below the line. I always want to be above the line, right? I want to have a good attitude. I want to have, all those different things. Now it's a little easier sometimes, right? If you are the person that's coming in, especially like a college football program where you can recruit and you can do all these different things. The hard part is like myself, when I walked into a situation where I didn't pick the staff I had, I didn't hire the people I had. So now what the hell do I do? Right? Mm-hmm. How do I get those people to the point where you're right. I want to do a lot of things. I want to achieve a lot of stuff. I want to constantly am learning things. I'm constantly reading things. I'm constantly listening to podcasts, or, I'm doing all those things. The best thing you can do if you're in that situation where you're, given a crap sandwich, you got to eat it, right? The best thing you can do, number one, is just know, number one is you're not going to change it overnight. Goes back to patience, right? Like I said, I tried to change things that should have been a 5 to 10 year program. I tried to change it in three months. Yeah. That I don't care who you are. Not going to happen. For sure. Right? Not going to happen. Yeah. So don't go in with that expectation. I was wrong thinking that I could do that. Okay. I was wrong. 100%. You have to go in with the mentality that, okay, this is a process. It's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take structure. It's going to take a lot of personal conversations. Like I said, I didn't communicate effectively. I didn't communicate the way I should have, right? Instead of coming in like a bull in a china shop, I should have sat down. I should have invited everyone to lunch, right? Hey, let's all go to, where do you guys like to go? Where do you like to go to lunch? Right? Don't go in and say, hey, I'm gonna bring everyone to where I want to eat. Don't do that. Ask them, hey, where do you go? Where do you all go for lunch? You know, throw some ideas out. Where's your favorite place? Where do you like to go? Right? Then when they start saying, well, this is this and this, okay, great, let's go. We're all gonna go to lunch. I should have had conversations and been, more personable like that. Because you're going to get way more, like they say, you're going to get way more out of giving honey than you are going to give, vinegar,
Yes.
And that is 100% the truth. That goes with everything. And that goes with every difficult conversation, right? That's a whole different topic, having difficult conversations, especially when you're trying to, help people, proceed in advance. But at the same time, I didn't do the things I knew I should have been doing, and that was stupid. And getting people to that higher level, it's going to take time and it's going to take communication, right? But it's also going to take modeling, right? If I want you to do the things that I want you to do, then you need to see me doing them, right? I'm not going to just talk the talk. I'm going to walk the walk, right? Don't just come in and sit and make arbitrary decisions and send out 20 different emails and sit in your office and with the door shut and, no. I need to go out there. If I know that I need all these problems fixed and I know my officer corps is maybe clueless and they've been doing it the wrong way for 30 years, then I don't need to fix the things. I need to go in and I need to re-educate and bring my officer corps into the 21st century and to bring them up to speed. And we need to have that discussion. I need to do that first because it comes from the top down. If I skip my middle managers, right? If I skip my officer corps and go straight to the firefighters, even though they may be on board, what have I now become, right? I've just started, which is exactly what I did. I avoided that officer corps. I made it to them. They won't change. So we're going to skip them. Go right to the ground units that want to do and let's do this shit, and because that was easy for me to do, right? I didn't do the hard thing. I did the easy thing, and I created massive problems for myself in doing it.
So, Chief, when you share your vision for your expectations, do you share your high expectation or do you share your low expectation? Do you share the bottom baseline? Or do you go for the sky and share what your, perfect reality is?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, like I said, I shouldn't have done anything for like 5 months, right?
Yeah.
You got to find out what the waters are.
Yeah.
You got to find out. Yeah, you got to find out, what exactly is going on, what's going on, who's doing it, why are we doing it like that? All those different things. You got to find that stuff out first. Then you can create a vision, goals, all those different things. If my vision is to bring us to a, class 1 fire department, ISO class 1 fire department, and I know we're lacking budgetary constraints. I know we're lacking training things. I know we're lacking fire prevention things. I know we're lacking staff. If I know if my goal is that, if my vision is to get us to that point, right? That's fine. That's fine. But that's a process, right? So when I address the department and say, listen, this is my vision. This is where I'd love for us to be. But the caveat is I love for us to be there in 5 years, right? I'm not going to tell them we're going to be there in 6 months. I need to break that down. That's my vision. I need to break that down into manageable goals, right? All right. This is where bringing your officer corps, you need to have buy-in from your officers, right? If my vision is to be a class 1 department, I'm going to have that meeting with my officers first. After I've found out who the players are, after I've tested the waters, after I've found the history of the department, after all those different things. And if I get a lot of animosity, like, I don't know if that's going to work, or it's going to be a lot of money, or it's a lot of training, or we don't have the staff, or that's fine. That's fine. Then it's a chance now for me to work on, okay, if staffing is an issue, how can we, this is where we comes in, right? Not me, not I. How can we influence staffing changes? How can we do better with what we have? If that's the case, if we know we're not going to get 16, 20, 30, 40, if we know we're not going to get 100 new people and we're only going to be stuck with what we have, that's fine. Then let's look at efficiencies. Let's look at what can we do to be better at what we're doing? What can we do, or what can we incorporate that's going to make us work smarter, not harder, right? Where can we take some of the weight off? If we know our med guys are running their ass and, they don't need to be going to lifting assists, then we can have the engine company just do the lifting. You know what I mean? Like, where can we help each other, right?
Sure.
But that's a conversation for us, not everybody in the department. That's the officers and up, right? Where can we establish, what can we do, right? Where can we improve? And now, if everyone sits there and doesn't say anything, then you have to wonder, like, okay, then it's your time. Then you have to lead by example. Say, okay, listen, as I've walked around, this is what I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Give them the opportunity to tell you that you're wrong. That's fine. This is what I've been seeing for the past 6 months, or this is what I've been seeing for the past 3 weeks, or, I've noticed that when we go on calls, this is the, our ISO, or, our standards, our SOPs they say this is our, tertiary, where we get dispatched out of, or whatever the situation is, right? This is what I've noticed. Correct me if I'm wrong. If everyone wants to not say anything, that's fine. But then throw that out there. Listen, correct me if I'm wrong about this. Is this the history? Is this the way we've been doing this? Is this right? Am I seeing this right? Let them correct you. Maybe you are looking at it wrong. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know everything. I'm coming in from, I have no idea what you big guys have been doing for the past 15 years. I wasn't here for 15 years.
Maybe they're grieving and their operations are totally different.
I mean, it could be a whole different situation where, especially my prior department, we've tried those changes. They don't work. Okay, fine. Why didn't they work?
No.
Well, it was because this, and this. Okay. Well, if that was the reason, 3 of those reasons are no longer on the city council anymore, or, things have changed, right? Circumstances have changed. Why don't we try it again? Why don't we, if this wasn't the case, if this didn't work last time, then we need to go back. Let's evaluate why it didn't work, right? Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's learn from the process, and let's change and fix the things that are going to go forward that may work, right? It may not work. It may fail again. So what? Then we'll reevaluate again and we'll redo it again, right? The old OODA loop thing. I mean, let's figure it out. Like, it doesn't have to, it may not work. Great. We could write for a grant. We're not going to get the grant. And then one year we get the grant. We didn't change a word in the grant. The people reviewing it changed, or the circumstance, they had more money this time, or whatever, right? Things changed. And that's, people have to be okay with that. But at the same time, as the leader, you have to be honest and open with people and be like, listen, this is what's going on. This is the kind of stuff that's going on. Let me share with you the process and get everyone involved in what's going on,
Mistakes are one of the best lessons we can have, right? Is learning from our mistakes.
Absolutely.
So, Chief, what's one final message you'd love to leave our listener with today that, maybe changed your life in the leadership realm? What would be that one key message you want to leave with our listener?
The biggest thing that I've been preaching recently, say the last couple of years, especially after my second book came out, is don't fear failure.
Mm.
That's embrace the failure, really. You know, you're never gonna improve if you don't step outside the box. You're never gonna, I am a picky eater. Okay. I am a very picky eater. I'm not big for things. I'm not big on onions. They give me indigestion. I don't like them, but I like hot things. I like, and my wife really likes sushi and, different things like that. So she had calamari and some other things, and I'm like, yeah, I'll try a piece. Fine. Yeah, it tastes like rubber bands. I thought, right?
From the ocean.
Yeah, it tastes exactly what I thought it would taste like. It tastes horrible, and no, I have no interest in eating it ever again. But at the same time, you don't know that until you try it.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I've got 3 daughters. My middle daughter she would not try hamburgers to save her life. I couldn't convince her to, but then one day she was sicker than a dog, and she was sick for like 3, 4, 5 days in a row. And then when she was finally feeling better, I'm like, hey, you want to go to McDonald's or something? Yeah. All right. Instead of chicken nuggets, I'm like, Pipe, how about you try hamburger this time? Let's try hamburger. Come on. I'll buy a hamburger and you just take one bite, and she's like, oh, okay, fine. So then she tried it. Now she loves freaking hamburger. I can't get her to eat anything but a hamburger, so that's the thing though. You don't know anything until you try something, right? And like I said, you don't have to know it all, because you're not going to know it all. You don't have, all those different things, like, like I said, all the screw ups and the mistakes. I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now if I hadn't screwed up as a fire chief. I wouldn't, right? Because my life course would have completely altered. I would have taken a completely different path, right? If I hadn't been laid off, if the school district hadn't made their changes and I hadn't been laid off, and they would have saved me because I was a football coach, instead of playing the seniority game and saying, well, Mark, you're the lowest man in the totem pole, I wouldn't be sitting with you here right now either, right?
100%.
So, and that's the thing, like, we don't know where life's going to take us. We don't know the things that we're going to learn in the process. And we don't know what's, I would love to know what the lottery numbers are, but we don't know. We have no idea, we have absolutely no idea. And what we may think is the worst thing in the world could happen to you. I can't believe, sitting in a police and fire commission meeting, having a coming to Jesus meeting where they were going to fire my ass that day. They were going to fire me that day. But the only thing that saved me from getting fired that day was the fact that I sat there and listened to them bitch and complain and listened to them read their letters. And I sat back and I shut my ego off. And I said, you know what? I'm 100% at fault. It is all my fault. I accept 100% of the responsibility. I totally screwed this thing up. And, all I can say is that I'll try to do better.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's it. They didn't want to, because again, going back to having difficult conversations, no one wants to be an asshole. I don't want to have to fire you. I don't want, you were hired. We had hopes, we had dreams, and we wanted the best, because we do. When we hire people, we have the hopes and we have the best. We don't ever hire someone thinking that, well, that's going to be the biggest shitbag this department's ever seen. No one ever goes into thinking, at least I don't know anybody that's ever thought like that. We don't ever hire someone thinking that they're going to be the worst, employee ever, that I'm constantly going to have, discussions with that. No one ever thinks that. We always have high hopes, right? Sure. We always think, okay, this guy's he's gonna contribute and they're gonna work out. This lady's fantastic and she's gonna really help us out. We all have that hope, right? Things happen, calls happen, life happens, and we make decisions. Sometimes they're good decisions, sometimes they're bad decisions, right? But the biggest thing is learning from those mistakes, embracing that failure, and evaluating and learning what went wrong and changing so that you don't do it again, right?
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately, literally the definition of crazy, right? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. Don't be crazy.
Yeah.
Actually evaluate, actually look at what you're doing, actually learn from the mistake, make yourself better, and then share with others what you learned. That is the biggest thing, and that's the biggest takeaway that, I hope everyone can take away from that.
And for me, self-leadership is something I'm very passionate about. Like you say, you're kind of diving into this last little while, and that's kind of where I've kind of dived into, is all about leading self. And I know you talk about that in your book as well, as, you can't lead anyone else until you start leading yourself. And I would say leading from your mistakes, from your challenges in the past, that is how you become a better leader for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, it's been a privilege to sit down and chat with you and hear about your journey through the fire service and the lessons that you learned, right? So I appreciate you sharing that. How can people learn more about Mark and purchase your books?
Amazon. I'm on Amazon. Just look me up, Mark with a C. Hill, Marc Hill. Yes, it is that simple. Yes, everyone, they always question, like, how do you spell Hill? Hill. Like,
That's pretty easy.
like it sounds. There's no Y in there. No, there's no Y. There's no E at the end. No.
Well, I think in your onboarding form, it said, as it sounds.
Yeah, as it sounds. It's Marc Hill. It's nothing weird. But also my website's toodark30.com, which is written out TWO dark 30. Yes, THIRTY.com. Or I'm on Amazon, obviously, LinkedIn, Facebook. It's all Too Dark 30 stuff.
Awesome.
LinkedIn, I'm just obviously Marc Hill.
Yep.
Instagram, all that different stuff. And again, too, like, if you go to my website, if people have questions, email me. I don't charge for opinions. I could give you my opinion, and it doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean, what worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but, at least I can maybe give you an idea, or maybe I know someone that, knows, what you're looking for, or, can answer your question too. So
yeah, love it.
Don't ever be afraid to ask. That's the other thing. The worst they can say is no, right?
Yep, 100%. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this awesome episode with Marc Hill, author, previous coach, previous fire chief, and owner of Too Dark 30. So hopefully you took some notes and learned from some of his challenges that he went through in his career, and that you can take into your own life. So until next time, stay well. All right, that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.